upstream to do this. Okay, so I'll give you another example. I have a friend that many years ago, when he was in high school and college, he actually had a job at Disneyland. So what is Disneyland? Disneyland is a huge amusement park here in Southern California. And I'll tell you, that is like a system that operates 24 hours a day. Now, the park is closed at around midnight or 11 o'clock, depending on what season you go. But I'll tell you, the work doesn't stop at midnight. He used to be one of these people that would go in at night and take care of things that were happening in Disneyland at night. And he was a janitor. He would clean up the trash. There's all sorts of things that happen in Disneyland at night. The engineers come out, the rides stop, they check the rides for safety, they empty the cash registers, they restock the stores. All of those things that are necessary for Disneyland to work during the day happens at night when the amusement park is closed. And your body has to work under the same rules. There are things that your body does during the day that can only happen if certain processes are occurring at night. And we're not just talking about sleep. We're talking about the quality of cells, the quality of proteins, DNA, all of these things. And obviously, just like a city, as things keep going on, things start to break down and need to be repaired. The liability in a city is that when something is not repaired for a long period of time, it's going to stop working and it's going to break down. Okay, that's the liability in a city. However, a human being is much different in that respect. And here's the real danger. The real danger is that in the human body, not only is there a risk of something that goes on for a long period of time breaking down and not working, but there's also the risk of something breaking down and turning into cancer. Okay, so there's a much bigger risk. And so the ability for your body to go around your system, finding things that are not working correctly, finding things that are liabilities, eating them up, getting rid of them is extremely important. And those processes occur at certain times of the day or night, as it may be. And so this is very important if you want to be a clean and running machine that has top quality parts and is getting its maintenance done on a regular basis. It's important that you give the body the opportunity to do those maintenance sort of things. Okay, so that's something I want to see. And you can already start to see what I'm talking about. That obviously intermittent fasting is one of those things that's going to help. And of course, what I'm talking about here has absolutely nothing to do with how much you weigh. It has to do with the quality of the proteins inside your body. So as I said before, there's a time for building on the left, and there's a time for repair on the right. And unless both of those things are happening, you're going to have a problem. You're either going to have a city that never develops, or you're going to have a city that builds, but never repairs anything that it builds. You need both of those things to happen, and that's important. So let's go to this review article that was published in 2019 in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, talking about the effects of intermittent fasting on aging, health, and disease. And they bring up a couple of points. Number one, they say fasting is not just about eating less calories or burning fat. I've already made that point here. That's a very important point to understand here. We're not talking about eating less, although that is helpful. We're talking about what eating less triggers in the body. And it's very important to understand this, is that when you stop eating food, when you stop specifically eating carbohydrates, that your body, because it likes to use carbohydrates, will use carbohydrates first before using proteins and fats. And so when you stop eating carbohydrates, and the body will switch over to a different type of metabolism that utilizes fatty acids. And when this occurs, it starts to create a signal in the body called ketones. So ketone bodies, which is the product of fat metabolism, and that gets ramped up when you fast, even for just a few hours. So it takes about 3 to 4 hours of not eating for your body to start to go into this fasting state. Ketone bodies are not just fuel used during periods of fasting. Here's the key point that I want you to understand. They are potent signaling molecules with major effects on cell and organ functions. So in other words, when you stop eating, after about 3 or 4 hours of using up the reserve of carbohydrates that you've eaten, your body now flips a switch. And it's this flipping of the switch that's really important, because it takes about 3 or 4 or 5 hours for this to occur. If you eat again before those 3 or 4 or 5 hours is up, you now replenish the store of carbohydrates, and the switch never gets flipped. Okay, this is important to understand. So you need to be fasting for an extended period of time during the day for that switch to be flipped. And what does that switch do? It's turning on the repair function of the body. Okay, so ketogenesis initiates activity in a variety of cellular signaling pathways. We're going to talk about some of the specifics here. We're going to get very technical, and it may go over some of your head, but you're just going to have to trust me on this. I'm showing you the evidence. It enhances the body's defense against oxidative stress. We talked about oxidative stress yesterday. So going outside into the sun helps with oxidative stress. Here's something else that helps with oxidative stress. And it initiates the removal of repaired or damaged molecules. So if molecules can be repaired, they are repaired, heat shock proteins, etc. Okay, this carries over into the non-fasting period and can actually improve glucose regulation, increase stress resistance, and suppress inflammation, improve mental and physical performance. And that should not come as a surprise, because if you are, just like if you were to take a car in and get the carburetor checked and the oil filter replaced and get new spark plugs while you're not driving it, you can imagine that when you are driving it, it's going to run better. Same thing happens here. If you allow time for repair to occur during the period of time when you're not eating, that when you are eating, all of that machinery is going to be able to work more effectively at metabolizing the food that you eat. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the different types of intermittent fasting. There's intermittent fasting, of course, where you don't eat for a certain period of the day. There's called alternative day fasting, where you eat every other day. This is another technique that's used occasionally. There's the 5 and 2, where you eat for 5 days and fast for 2 days. And then there's this time-restricted eating, where you eat, as I said, 6 to 10 hours a day. In other words, there's a window period of time in which you eat, and it's limited. And outside of those hours, you do no eating of any sort. You can drink water, you can take in things that are non-caloric, but during those times is the only time that you can eat. So for instance, let's say that we made it a 10-hour time-restricted eating. That means that when you get up in the morning, and let's say you would eat at 8 o'clock, then the last time you would be able to put any kind of carbohydrates or calories into your mouth would be 6 o'clock that evening, and there would be nothing after that. So what are the effects of fasting? So there's a lot of things that occur. As we talked about, you'll see these things pop up. There are sirtuins. Sirtuins are a family of genes that promote proteins that are involved with longevity. Okay, and ISS was the insulin. There are also genetic factors and promoters called AMPK and mTOR. So the effect of fasting is to, red arrow, suppress high levels of insulin, but to promote sirtuins. They also promote this thing called AMPK, but they also suppress effects of fasting mTOR. mTOR is one of these things that we want to suppress, because mTOR suppresses the ULK complex, which is promoted by AMPK. And all of this is to say that all of this promotes this thing called autophagy. So what is autophagy? Autophagy, literally in the Latin, is autophagy, which literally translated into English is self-eating. Self-eating is exactly what it is that we want to do during this period of time. Our body uses the damaged structures in our body, whether they be proteins or fats, things that are damaged and tagged for destruction. They are broken down and used as energy. And then in the next pass, for the next day, they are built back up better and newer with no damage. So what we want to have is this cycle of building with autophagy, building with autophagy. And if we do many of these cycles over and over again, you're going to see very clearly that you're going to have a well-functioning machine that is free and void of a lot of issues. Let me just pause right here. I am a purveyor of social media because I'm on social media, and I look around and I see, and it's amazing to me how this information has come to us in this truth, but how there are many other cultures that have this, and have this information. I was watching a YouTube video that had an Indian guru, and he was teaching this class, and he had this very long white beard, and he was saying exactly what I'm telling you here. He said, he says, look, in America, they have a university that has come out and said that intermittent fasting is the way to go. He says, we here have been saying this for thousands of years. We've been saying that, he says, I only eat 1 meal a day. He says, we've been saying this for thousands of years. This is a way that there are things in your body that could turn into cancer, and that these things can be eradicated by making sure that your body is eating the bad things. I was blown away. This information has been around for a long time, but we have gotten societally and culturally into this idea that we need to eat 3 times a day, and then we attune our body into this idea that we must eat 3 times a day. And then when we try to take it away, our body rejects this because we're used to eating 3 times a day. I've talked to people who have changed their diets, where they used to eat 3 times a day, and then they started to go to intermittent fasting, and they would only eat 2 times a day. And at first, they were hungry at night, and they thought that they were somehow going against nature. But you know what? The body adapts and adjusts, and sooner or later, their body perfectly adjusted to them eating 2 meals a day, or maybe a very light early dinner, and they were fine. They never were hungry again by going into that. And so I just want to give you a certain sense here that there's no hard and fast rule that says that you have to eat 3 times a day. It's what we've become adjusted to. So just to round out this slide here, these are very important concepts on this slide. The key here is breaking down bad things, because bad things in your body cause bad diseases like cancer, diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's disease. All of these are tied to damaged mitochondria. What's the best way to get rid of damaged mitochondria? It's to break it down and build a new one. And that's exactly what your body does during this period of time. So autophagy is associated with anti-aging, immunity, antigen presentation, regulates T cells and B cells. It's required to produce antibodies, all of these things. Look, ladies, if you want to look glowing and stunning, and you want to keep your youthful beauty, the best way to do that is to break down the things that get old and put it back with brand new things. And it's well known that this is one of the things that you can do. Let's look at the data. Here's a study that was published in back in, I think it was in the 2010s. This is titled Prolonged Fasting Reduces IGF, PKA to Promote Hemopoietic Stem Cell-Based Regeneration and Reverse Immunosuppression. So what they found was that prolonged fasting downregulated the IGF-1 PKA pathway in stem cells, that prolonged fasting protected your blood cells from chemotherapy, that prolonged fasting cycles promoted self-renewal and to reverse immunosuppression from chemotherapy, and that inhibition of IGF-1, which is insulin growth factor 1, which is the thing that's associated with insulin and diabetes, signaling mimics the effects of prolonged fasting, and that intermittent fasting of 72 hours. So if you fasted, we're not talking about intermittent fasting, but 72 hours of fasting, but not 24 hours, we're able to maintain the WBCs, or the white blood cells, even in light of chemotherapy. And this was an amazing study that sort of got things started. What they found was that people on chemotherapy, usually about 2 weeks after chemotherapy, their white blood cells had dropped dramatically, and they would be susceptible to getting infections because their immune system was suppressed. Doing this intermittent type of fasting, or doing fasting for 2 or 3 days, caused there to be a complete renewal of their immune system, so much so that it regenerated the immune system to a point that even when they got chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy was designed to kill whatever cancer was out there, the immune system was not affected by the chemotherapy. And this university, this is a University of Southern California, showed that they could reduce the incidence of infections in their chemotherapy patients if they did intermittent fasting prior to getting chemotherapy. Here's another one. Intermittent fasting promotes white adipose browning and decreases obesity by shaping the gut microbiota. So fasting actually improves the bacteria in your gut, which is now being shown to be incredibly important in terms of metabolic health. It also is speeding up and increasing the amount of mitochondria that is in the cells. It reduces the risk of obesity and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it changes the gut microbiota to a favorable one for metabolic health. This is intermittent fasting, okay? Here's a study that was done in China, and you say, well, that's great. What about people who are overweight and diabetic? Is there hope for them? Well, this was a study that looked at 120 overweight diabetics with type 2 diabetes in China. And they did a 1-to-1 randomization. And what they did was they randomized them to just eating however they want. And the other side, the intervention side, did a 10-hour restriction. They only ate from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock p.m. That was the only thing. So they didn't tell them what to eat. They didn't tell them how much even to eat. All they told them to do was to say, don't eat outside of these times. Don't eat before 8 o'clock in the morning, and don't eat after 6 p.m. That's all they did. Okay. Now, what was the result of that? Now, on average, they found that that it delayed the first meal by about 2 hours. So they did eat a little bit later, and they advanced the last meal by about 2 hours. So that's basically what they did, was they delayed the first meal by 2 hours, and the last meal, they advanced it by 2 hours. That got them packed in so that they got all their calories up front in one area and allowed that whole time around during the night and the early evening and the early morning to not be eating anything. What they found just by doing that was that the behavior of the subjects in the intervention group had actually ingested less calories and by about 28%. But what happened as a result of that? Let's take a look here. So you can see here, here's the clock time. Here is the time-restricted feeding people, the people that ate only from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening, whereas the control group were able to eat any time that they wanted. Let me just tell you, by the way, this control group is very common here in the United States. We have a restaurant in the United States, a restaurant chain called Denny's. That's the name of the restaurant, Denny's, and they're all over. And if you go into a Denny's and you look up at the menu when you walk into the restaurant, they actually have 4 menus. They have breakfast, they have lunch, they have dinner, and they have a menu called late night. So they are giving, and they're open 24 hours. You can get food any time of day or night. And that might actually be the problem that we're having with this, is that people, even though we can eat whenever we want, the question is should we be eating whenever we want, or should we limit that time? Well, this is going to tell us here. What they noticed is that their hemoglobin A1C came down in the intervention group 18%, whereas in the control group, it came down only 8%. So hemoglobin A1C is like a 3-month average of your average blood sugar. Take a look at the fasting glucose, though. The fasting glucose dropped by 26 milligrams per deciliter versus 14 milligrams per deciliter. For those of you on the millimoles per liter, which I think you are there in South Africa, you can see here, according to the study, it was almost a 1.5 points in terms of your blood sugar that was dropping. And then in terms of weight, we said that intermittent fasting really isn't designed to lose weight, but there was weight loss. There was about almost a 3 kilogram reduction in weight over the 12 weeks that they did this over. So 12 weeks, and this is what they saw. Again, they did not tell them what to eat. They did not tell them how much to eat, just the timing. Imagine if we actually added in a more nutritious diet. Imagine if we added in cutting down the portions. I think that these results would have been magnified. And this is just diabetes. We haven't even touched yet about the effects on other things. Let's talk about that. There's a number of randomized placebo-controlled trials, placebo as much as you can with intermittent fasting. And here are all the references on the right side. Let's go down. What is the effect of fasting on metabolic health? Well, the studies show that there's a reduction in visceral fat, fasting insulin, and insulin resistance. Okay, reduction. What about on physical exercise? There's a reduction in fat mass while maintaining muscle area in the arm, thigh, and maximal strength. So intermittent fasting, you might think it's going to make you weaker or you're not going to be as strong. That's not what the studies show. This is a really important one, especially for us in America. I'm not sure how things are in South Africa, but we have a real problem with breast cancer and breast cancer recurrence. So women who about 1 in 8 women in the United States will get breast cancer. I don't know what it is in South Africa, but if it's anything like it is here in the United States, it's not good. If you're a woman who has breast cancer and you want to reduce your chance of a recurrence, there's a study just for you here that showed that fasting less than 13 hours per night was associated with a 36% increase risk in breast cancer recurrence. That means you should be fasting for 14 hours. What does that mean? If there's 24 hours in a day and you should be fasting for at least 14 hours, that means you should be eating only within a 10-hour window, kind of like we talked about. So that means eating after 8 o'clock in the morning and stopping eating after 6 p.m. If you are a woman who's had breast cancer and you stick to eating, just doing this, just eating after 8 and before 6, you've already reduced your risk, your recurrent risk of breast cancer by 36%. That's astounding. And again, this goes back to the basis of what we were talking about in the beginning, which is when you give your body the ability to go around the body and to mop up problem cells that could turn into a problem, and you eat them up, that's the best time to take care of them, not when they're a mass. And you've got a real problem at that point. The best time to do it is right there. All right, what about hormones? Intermittent fasting. 3 days into a fast, they noticed, this is a full fast, not intermittent fasting, that growth hormone was 3-fold higher. Let me tell you, growth hormone is what is secreted at the beginning of sleep. It's associated with slow wave sleep, and it's very, very commonly associated with young age. So it makes you feel like you're younger. And maybe it's because you actually are biologically younger when you do that, maybe not chronologically. We talked about the importance of the gut microbiome. So fasting changed the gut microbiome to a more healthier population. And there's many studies that have shown that a healthy gut microbiome is key to doing better. All right, so we've gone over a lot of the evidence for this. What do you do practically? And I want to sort of focus on that. And we may end a little bit early here because I know there's probably a lot of questions on this, maybe questions on the previous lectures that we've had. And so let's define sleep. So what's the first thing that you ought to do? You got to figure out where you're going to be sleeping and when you're going to be sleeping. Okay. So generally speaking, you should be sleeping for at least 7 to 9 hours per night. It's hard to do, especially for people who are professionals and have a lot of work to do, but you really should be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So that means going to bed at 10, 11, ideally 9, getting 8 hours of sleep, going all the way to 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay. So carve out that time between 9 and 6 where you can get as much sleep as possible. And then I would say no calories 1 hour after waking up. So here's where I'm going with this. Figure out where your sleep is, and that's the anchor to how you're going to get your 13 to 14 hours of fasting, okay? And let me give you some advice. My advice would be to front load your calories in the morning. And why do I say that? It's because of the very first slide that I showed you, which showed that insulin sensitivity was highest in the morning. So ideally, you really should be eating breakfast like a king. You should be eating lunch like a prince. and eating dinner like a pauper, or maybe like a pauper, really not eating anything at all, depending on how serious you want to be about this and depending on what kind of a health situation you're in. So 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And then from there, you want to work backwards, okay? So ideally, you really should not be eating anything 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. Okay, I once had a patient who had severe gastroesophageal reflux disease. And he didn't realize that when he was putting food into his mouth just a few hours before he was going to bed, it was causing stomach acid to go into his stomach to digest it. And then he was lying flat and that acid was coming up. As soon as he started to not eat 3 to 4 hours before going to sleep, and why would I say this? It's because remember what I said at the beginning, it takes about 3 to 4 hours for all of those carbohydrates and sugars in your body to go away before your body starts to do the ketones and starts to flip that switch and go into fasting mode. Ideally, you want that fasting mode to begin when you're going to sleep. So if you're eating up until bedtime, drinking coffee, drinking a tea, having a milkshake, having a burger, having a late night snack, all of that is going to nix the very important intermittent fasting that you need to have all of these things happen at night. So ideally, 4, 5, 6 even hours before you go to bed is ideal. This is the reason why I think it's important to have breakfast at 8 or after 8 if you can, and then making sure that you're not eating anything after 6 o'clock p.m. And so this is the question, and it's hard to answer this question, is if you're going to eat 2 meals a day, and you want to get your intermittent fasting in, should you drop the breakfast meal of the day or should you drop the dinner meal? I think we've answered that question from my standpoint. I know a lot of people that skip breakfast and just have lunch and dinner. It's because when they come home from work, their family is there. It's a social time, and it's the most ideal time to have people around the table. I understand that completely. Let's face it. Even Jesus had supper, right? He had the Last Supper. So this is a social thing to do. I'm not saying here that this is the wrong thing to do or the right thing to do, but our body, the way our body was designed, it seems to be that all things else being equal, better to have things front loaded and maybe not toward the end of the day, especially 3 to 4 or 5 hours before you put your head on the pillow. Again, here's another article here. This is early time-restricted feeding improves 24-hour glucose levels and affects markers of circadian clock aging and autophagy in humans. Here they looked at 2 studies. This was 11 overweight adults. It was a 4-day randomized crossover study. So they used each other for their own control, which is a very powerful study design. And again, they did 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Sorry, they did, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. versus 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That was the control. So again, here's the control. The control group, breakfast at 8, lunch at 2, dinner at 8 o'clock at night. How many of us are in that category, right? And then it was about 12 hours to the next meal versus breakfast at 8, lunch at 11, dinner at 2. And now you've got 18 hours until the next meal. So they really packed this in. Okay. They really they put it within, looks like within 6 hours. Okay. Which is even more than I would do. But they really concentrated it. So let's see what happened when they did that. It affected the circadian clock genes. As you would imagine, these are the genes that regulate the clock. And the ETRF is the intervention group. You can see here that there was definite changes in BMAL1, which is a gene that codes for your circadian rhythm. All of these may be a little bit above the level here that we want to talk about, but here's the take-home message from this slide, is that when you change your diet timing, your body is going to adjust to that. I think this is a very reassuring slide. At first, you're going to feel like you're hungry when you're not having that meal that you normally have. But what's going to happen is your body is going to adjust with these clocks to make sure that it's getting its genes set up so that it's ready to digest that food when you are going to be eating. So don't feel bad if at first, when you're changing, you have a time of day where you're really hungry. Don't think that you're going to be like that for the rest of your life. Your genes are going to adjust to make sure that you're not hungry. Just like you're not hungry in the middle of the night, right? Because your body is not normally accepting of food at that time. When you change things, your body is going to make adjustments. It's going to take some time, but it will happen. Okay. What are some other things that happen? Here, notice that there was improved glycemic control by lowering 24-hour glucose levels. When you compacted your calories into a certain time of the day, all right, your body was able to front load all of that sensitive insulin and take care of things so that over time, your blood glucose levels were better. They reduced the glycemic ups and downs. When you spread that thing out throughout the day, ironically, you have more ups and downs throughout the day. They noticed that AM cortisol amplitude was higher. You can see that here in the gray bar on the right. There was statistically significant increased cortisol levels in the morning, which is when you want to have it. And they improve hormones and genes relating to longevity. Here they were. The BDNF gene, the brain-derived natriuretic factor, is a gene that's involved with Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. This is a protein or a gene that you want to have upregulated because it protects your neurons. And you can see here clearly in the intermittent fasting arm of this study, it was higher. Okay. SIRT1 is a sirtuin. This is one that's been shown to extend lifespan. Notice what's happening here. It's going up. It's going up in the intermittent fasting trial. And then the LC3A, this is the thing that recycles damaged genes, proteins. This was significantly higher in the morning, and I think is very encouraging in terms of the role of intermittent fasting with cancer reduction. We've already shown that with breast cancer. So, what is it that breaks a fast? What is it that you can eat or take into your body that is not going to break that fast that you have? Water. Oh, by the way, before we get started on that, what breaks a fast? Have you ever thought about that word? What breaks a fast? What breaks a fast? Breakfast. Breakfast is what breaks a fast. That's how that word actually came about. Think about that. Breakfast it's all about breaking the fast, right? And when you do it. So water does not break a fast, okay? Lemon water does not break a fast. So I want to be clear here is that when you're fasting from food, not from water. You want to make sure that you're well hydrated. And I tell you, this helps me having a pitcher of water with lemon in it in the kitchen. Whenever you're hungry, you're socially just psychologically going to the kitchen looking for something to graze on. There's a nice pitcher of water there with lemon in it. Pour a big glass and drink it. That will put something into your stomach. It will take away this idea that you got to put something into your mouth, and it will not break your fast. Even the lemon in there, whatever carbohydrates may be in there is perfectly fine. The studies are mixed on coffee and caffeine. Some say, yes, it does break the fast. Some say no. I would say that there's other reasons not to be imbibing coffee and caffeine. Taking medications in the morning. If you have to take medications in the morning, you could probably take it with a spoonful of yogurt, which doesn't have a lot of carbohydrates and probably would not break a fast. But remember that some nutrients absorb better with food. So it depends on the medicines. You have to sort of be creative. I would say that you shouldn't be fasting in the morning. That's when you should be getting your most amount of food anyway. And we already talked about when it's the best time to break a fast. I think breakfast is when you should break a fast. And I think the fact that the word actually has those two words in it is a good reason. But I would do it with not something that's going to spike your glucose. You know, fruit juices I really are not impressed with. I think whole fruits are a much better way of getting your fruits in than fruit juices. And that has to do with how they're complexed and the release of that glucose into your body. It's much, much higher and faster with fruit juices than it is with fruits. And so that's what I would say. So who is this not for? Who is some contraindications to this? I would not have you do this if you're pregnant. You could do it probably gently, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. When you're pregnant, this is not the time to be doing intermittent fasting. Your body is in build mode. Not only build you, but build a tiny creature inside of you. And so I would say maybe wait till afterwards. Obviously, people with a history of eating disorder should be careful. This could exacerbate anorexia nervosa, obviously. And so you need to be careful about that. There's also people who have difficulty with hypoglycemia. So we have to be cognizant of the idea that this may not be for people if they fast for an extended period of time and they have issues with low glucose. This could obviously exacerbate that. So it's always wise to talk to your physician first. So we are, let's see, we're about 12 minutes. We've got just enough time to go over a possible schedule for people before we finish up and take some questions. So we're almost ready here for that. So I am a shift worker. Part of the time I get up in the morning, I go in at 7 o'clock and I work till 7 p.m. because I'm a healthcare worker and that's just the way things are. And so the question is how can you adapt to doing this? So I came up with a schedule that may work for some people, especially for those of you there in South Africa who are, you're coming into springtime right now, but you remember what it was like in the wintertime when the sun sets very early and gets up late, and maybe you're getting up and going to work before the sun even comes up. So what do you do in these situations? We just talked about light and how it's important. So this is my recommendation: is you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and right there I know I've lost some people, but this will get easier as you get used to it. Anybody can wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Even your night owls can get up at 5 o'clock in the morning if you are in a different time zone, right? So you just got to get your circadian rhythm timed correctly. So get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's no light, but you need light, especially in the wintertime, to avoid SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder. And do your 10,000 lux light that we were talking about like yesterday for 20 minutes to get your 3,000 lux hours in. Okay. So you do that for 20 minutes. It's now 5:20. You have time to meditate on scripture, or you can meditate on a devotional, or you can work out in the morning. Exercise is very good. You can then have breakfast at 6 o'clock, and that's when we start the clock right there. So we're already starting to eat at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's when the clock starts for when you finished your breakfast. That gives you enough time to eat in about half an hour and leave for work at 6:30. You get to work at 7 and you start your shift work. What I would say is if you have the opportunity to do it, you've had breakfast and now you're going to have lunch. And sometimes they give you lunch anywhere from 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Whenever that time is, make sure you get outside into the sunlight, because remember we just had that talk about yesterday, how about sunlight reduces the glucose concentrations, and so you can reduce that. So getting outside, getting some sunlight, because you're locked up inside your work there all the time, and probably the windows aren't letting infrared light in. Go outside and have your lunch now, but your lunch is going to be your last meal, because when you get home at 7:30 that evening and 8 o'clock, instead of eating, go to bed. Go to bed by 9 p.m. so that when you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you still have your 8 hours of sleep. And so what are you getting? You're getting 8 hours of sleep. You are getting 2 meals a day. You're eating breakfast when your insulin is the most sensitive, and you're getting some sunshine that's going to help you during the day. Now, you don't have to go into the sun directly. If you're concerned about ultraviolet light, you can cover up and get that near infrared that's reflecting off the leaves. But I think if you are a 7 to 7 shifter and you have to do this for months to improve your health rather than you having the liability of health during that period of time in the wintertime, shift work, this is exactly what I would recommend doing. It's going to take some discipline. Okay, so with that, we've talked to you about the philosophy of intermittent fasting. We've given you evidence for how intermittent fasting works. We've given you some pretty high-level evidence in terms of randomized crossover placebo-controlled trials. And then we've taken that data and put together a practical application of how to put that to work in your life, not only from data from this lecture, but also from the previous lecture. Okay, so for that, I think we are done, and we've got 10 minutes of time here if we want to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Swart. Wonderful talk again. We've got quite a lot of time for people that have got questions. I see Lorraine has raised her hand there.
Good evening. Thank you for the talk, Dr. Swart.
Yes.
I just want to find out with children, how would this be also fine for children to only eat during those hours, or should they be eating more frequently if they're young?
Yeah, kids are a different situation. So this intermittent fasting is really for people who have reached their steady state. So some people over the age of 20 or 30, kids are growing. They have a very low risk of cancer, very low risk of things that are damaged. And they're in a constant state of building. And for some kids, they can't get enough nutrition. I know I have 3 kids of my own. It seems as though when we feed them, they're bottomless pits. But you know exactly how it is that as soon as you hit to be about 25, 30, your metabolism starts to slow down. You start to put on a little bit of weight. Things start to become a little bit less functional. That's a good time to start to adopt intermittent fasting. So it may very well be, if you're in a young family household, that your kids are being fed at certain hours and you're not.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Got a question? If there is a hand, or just unmute yourself and speak. Just a question from me, Dr. Swart.
Yes.
Some people say, it's also good to eat, you can eat frequently but small meals. What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's sort of the other extreme of intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is trying to concentrate your meals at one time and then allowing the digestive organs to rest. It's interesting again. What this guru said, and it's just fascinating for me to hear these other cultures and how they have some of these truths that we have. He actually said something that I remember Ellen White saying many years ago, and I reviewed this again. He said this. He said that your brain cannot think clearly unless your stomach is empty. And so if we are eating frequent meals throughout the day, it's going to impair our ability to really think. This is the reason why when we come to rest days like the Sabbath, when we really want to focus and get the maximal benefit of meditation and spiritual renewal, it's best that we not overload our stomachs on those days, that we eat simple, light meals so that we can get the best benefit of that endeavor. And so I can only relate to you what people have told me. I've done once a 3-day fast where I ate nothing for 3 days and just drank water. And it's true, you reach a certain level of clarity in your mind when you start to think about things. It's your mind is not distracted. You're able to concentrate better. And I think if we were to do that on a more regular basis, we might wonder how well we are able to get things done and sit down and focus. So I do not recommend multiple small meals, although there are people with medical conditions where that might be required. For instance, if they've had gastric bypass or they have certain medical conditions. So again, what I'm recommending here is the ideal, but obviously with each individual, there's going to be extenuating circumstances. The situation of things change things. And so you have to, everyone's an individual, and you have to make those recommendations as they come.
All right. Thank you very much. I see Patronella's got a hand up. Patronella, you can unmute yourself and then ask.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Swart, for such a great presentation. I just wanted to find out regarding adults who very old, like above 90, can they actually follow intermittent fasting? And also, just to follow up on the previous lessons that you had, for the very same individual who has a heart problem, how can we administer hydrotherapy, and if there are any precautions that we need to take, what could they be?
Yeah, very good question. So let's answer the hydrotherapy question quickly. First, yes, if there is a heart problem, and it's really important to understand the nature of that heart problem, that realize when you administer hydrotherapy to somebody, you're heating up their body temperature, and that is necessarily going to increase their heart rate. And so if they are susceptible to getting cardiac arrhythmias, it may precipitate that to that effect. For instance, atrial fibrillation, heating up someone's body could increase the relative rate or the ventricular rate of that person in that situation. No more so than they would have gotten if they had a fever anyway, but just realize that fevers and temperature can do that to patients. Also, seizure disorders too. So a fever can cause a seizure. For some people, that seizure threshold is at a very high temperature. For other people, it's at a lower temperature. And so you have to make an educated guess about what the risks might be. One way of figuring that out is they have these watches that you can purchase, Apple watches, or even some of the other watches as well, that can monitor the heart rate as you're heating up their body, perhaps more mildly, to see if that becomes an issue. In terms of intermittent fasting in the elderly, 90-year-old, for instance, the age by itself is not a contraindication. I would say it would have to do with their clinical situation. If they're malnourished, you may not want to give them or provide for them intermittent fasting. I can tell you that my parents, when they're currently in their 80s, and when they were in their 60s and 70s, made a conscious decision that they were going to fast once a week. Because they understood the benefits of that. Actually, they understood the benefits before I did. I was not the one that convinced them. They're the ones that told me to look into it. And sure enough, the science has progressed since that time, and I've become an ardent follower of it. But they have enjoyed better health in their older years than they had when they're in their 50s and 60s, and they didn't do that. They also became very strict vegans. And for the most part, I mean, occasionally they might take a piece of cheese, but they're very conscious about fasting and doing these sorts of things. And I have to say that the Lord has blessed them in the last 10 or 12 years of doing that. So age itself is not a contraindication. If they're perfectly healthy and they're able to do that, why not?
All right. You.
Yeah, Sibonello, you can. Was that still Petronella wanted to? Was that Petronella follow-through question, or was that?
Oh no, I say thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Sibonello.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to check. I'm not sure if I heard correctly. When you said that intermittent fasting is not necessarily for weight loss, I wanted to ask if maybe, if most dietitians, for people who want to lose weight, they would suggest small meals throughout the day to not spike up the glucose level. So I'm just checking if this may be a different school of thought. If intermittent fasting could be used for weight loss. That's the first question. Second one is for someone who suffers from hypothyroidism. Some doctors have said that intermittent fasting is not good for them because it makes the thyroid lethargic. So I just wanted to check your understanding on that. Thank you.
I'm not aware of any evidence that intermittent fasting makes a hypothyroid patient more hypothyroid. I'm not, and I'm not saying that that's not the case. I just haven't seen any data. I'd be interested to see any data on that. I think the most important thing for someone who is hypothyroid is to make sure they're getting appropriate hormone replacement and have it checked to make sure, because if that's not in check, then you're going to have problems just about everywhere else. So, but I've never heard that intermittent fasting exacerbates hypothyroidism. I'd be interested to see that data. In terms of weight loss and weight loss and intermittent fasting, I say that statement up front. Certainly, intermittent fasting is a way that you can lose weight, but I just wanted to disarm the thinking that people might have up front that fasting is the primary purpose of fasting is to lose weight, and that's not the case in this situation. Weight loss is a beneficial side effect of intermittent fasting, but the real, I think, thing that is important for intermittent fasting is its ability to turn on repair systems. So let's compare two approaches. One approach is to reduce calories, but to spread it out. Okay, so small meals throughout the day. Another approach is to reduce the calories, but to keep it in one place. Both of them reduce calories, and both will probably have a benefit of losing weight. But do you see the difference between these two? The difference is that when you have small meals and spread them out throughout the day, you don't get the benefit of extending the repair process that occurs when you're sleeping. Whereas when you condense the eating process and allow a certain amount of time for ketone bodies to signal all of those things that we talked about, you have repair of damaged goods. Repairing of damaged goods doesn't change your weight. You see what I'm saying? If I take something, if I take a car and I break it down into its parts, all the parts weigh exactly the same as the car does. If I take damaged proteins in your body and I break them down, your body is the same weight, but now you have lost the progenitor of potential cancer or damage or the inability to produce energy because of a damaged mitochondria. So what I'm saying is don't focus on intermittent fasting as primarily a way of losing weight. Yes, it can do that. What I see as the great benefit of intermittent fasting is it's allowing the body's ability to break down bad things.
All right. Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I think that should be the last question. Yolanda is nodded, and everyone else was you posted your email addresses. So yeah, for those that are interested to get the slides, please just contact me, and I'll be able to share the slides that Dr. Schwartz has been sending. He sent me the two from the first two presentations. Otherwise, thanks everyone that made the time to come and listen to the talk. We are meeting again tomorrow for the last session, same time. Do you want to share the?
Yes, tomorrow we're going to talk about exercise, and I want people to. I don't want people to think that this is going to be a call to get out there and run a marathon, because I think the surprising thing that people are going to learn tomorrow is that it takes a lot less exercise than you think to be healthy, and we're going to go over the data.
Okay. All right. So looking forward again for tomorrow, and please make it a point not to miss. We'll start tomorrow on the dot at 6 o'clock. Yeah. Have a lovely day, Dr. Schwartz, and good evening to everyone. I'll just pray, and then we will dismiss everyone. Let's pray. Our dear loving Father, God in heaven, we come again thanking you for the time that we had when we had another lesson today about intermittent fasting. We pray that you will help us to have a stronger and even more urgent motivation to live healthy lifestyles, as that is also your will for us to be healthy, to prosper in health as we prosper in all of the dimensions of life. We pray that you'll be with Dr. Swart and everyone else that was there to listen to the talk. And we pray that you bring us again tomorrow for the last presentation. For this is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone. Good night, and God bless. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, it's Mowbray.
Yeah, it's